Chapter 3. Pam was waiting for me when I got back to Treadell House. I felt so taken aback by what Ethel Jago had told me that I found it difficult to remember where she'd been and why. Another more distant memory plucked at my thoughts and whispered inside my head, Nicky, as he'd been that long ago summer, when we'd had the run of Nanswerthal and the run of the world to look forward to. Nicky, as he'd been before the fate chose him as its perpetual victim. My own misfortune was so much more trivial than the tragedies he tried and failed to endure. A father hanged for murder, a mother dying for one of love, a sister missing for a year upon vanished year. How was he supposed to win against such odds without a friend to turn to? How were the Jangos? Pam asked. Bowed down, beaten by life, more or less. As bad as that, I'd say so, yes. Perhaps you shouldn't have gone. Perhaps I shouldn't have stayed away so long, but you hardly know them. True, but I do know them slightly. Why is that, Pam? Because you spent a week with them when you were 10, she frowned. What do you mean? Never mind. I tried to shrug off the niggling doubt my visit to Nanswerthal had left me with. Now I've been lured into thinking about it, setting up a farm holiday with Nicky for me to seemed a strange way for my parents and grandparents to demonstrate the disapproval they'd expressed of the Lanyons. How are Mum and Dad? Fine, rather shocked of course, but they want to talk to you about what happened, do they? Yes, I told them you were staying on for a few days. They suggested you go down there for lunch tomorrow, right? Shall I phone them and say you'll be there? Why not? You'll give me a chance to ask them. Ask them what? The question you didn't understand. Pam's frown deepened. I don't know what you're talking about. No, but they will. The ability of my family to edit its own past has always been marked. The origin of my friendship with Nicky Lanyon was one example. My grandfather's exemption from military service during the First World War was another. The ill health that dogged him during those years had seemingly relented by the time I knew him, and it certainly didn't prevent him living in a hale and hearty old age. Could it be that my grandmother thought the most stringent of patriots took a poor view of his chances of survival and decided she couldn't spare him? If so, I doubt it would have been beyond her to manipulate the medical facts to that end, which might explain, amongst other minor mysteries, why Dr. Truscott went on receiving a lavish complimentary hamper from us every Christmas, long after he retired from general practice. Archie Lanyon didn't have the benefit of Grand's farsightedness. He went off to war in a good health and excellent heart, returning well before the armistice, with the brain of a child and the body of an invalid. He didn't die for many years, but his life was over. Cordelia must have been as close to destitution as despair. She had a young son to rear as well as a helpless husband to care for, and the steadily more prosperous premise of Napier's grocery in River Street to pass whenever she needed reminding how much kinder life could have been to her if she had been fit. I didn't know how she coped from day to day, nor whether she had ever asked Gran for a favour or a loan or a helping hand. Maybe she was too proud to, or maybe she knew what answer she'd get. Gran owed her nothing, and Gran made a point of paying only what she owed. Either way, Cordelia must occasionally have thought of Joshua Carnworth, but never, I imagine, as their potential saviour, never, I strongly suspect, as a wanderer who was about to return. But in the spring of 1920 he did precisely that, to a city scarcely altered from the one he'd left 23 years before. The cathedral was complete, of course, and there were a few private cars and motorised taxis to be seen, but otherwise all was much as it had ever been, with the most road transparent, horse-drawn. The river canyon not yet covered, and the streets still lit by gas. The war had brought significant economic changes, though. The cost of living had soared, which was good news for my grandparents, who could build a little extra profit into rising food prices, and a matter of no consequence whatever to a man of such practical limitless means as my great-uncle. But for somebody in Cordelia's precarious circumstances, it poses a real threat. The rent of her home had doubled since before the war, but her ability to pay had plummeted. Uncle Joshua's reunion with his family seemed to have been a cool one. Gran always said he took a little dislike to Granddad and let them know he thought about thought mere shopkeepers beneath him. Now he'd acquired wealth and status. It's a version of events my father always went along with, but frankly it's never stood up to examination. The Joshua Carnworth I knew could be prickly enough, it's true, but he was no snob. The extent of his wealth was all the more surprising for its lack of effect on him. He owned a big house, but he lived simply and dressed plainly. He was the least ostentatious of the men, I don't doubt. There was a rift between brother and sister, but it had nothing to do with Uncle Joshua's opinion of my grandfather. Poor though it undoubtedly was, it had to do almost entirely with his employment of a housekeeper, because the housekeeper he employed was Cordelia Lanyon. What was their reunion like? How did Cordelia greet the man who'd come back to find, as he must have expected, that she hadn't waited for him? How did Uncle Joshua explain himself, his tardiness, his transformed circumstances, his distance from the lovesick Tina he'd once been? I imagined them standing awkwardly in the tiny front parlour at the house in St. Austell Street, looking at each other, fumbling for the words to encompass the experiences their diverging lives had compromised, while Archie lolled in a chair in the corner, dribbling and mewling, and young Michael gaped at them from the doorway. Cordelia was still beautiful, even in old age as I remember her. Her looks were pale and gentle, imprinted with the beauty that had been. Uncle Joshua was strong, handsome, and well-dressed. They looked at each other and saw what might have been if he'd come back sooner, if she'd followed him, if Archie had died instantly and mercifully. But she loved her husband. She didn't wish him dead. And Uncle Joshua admired her for that. Nothing would have been said outright, nothing declared, but they came to an understanding. The Lanyons moved into Trudell House. Within the month, Cordelia took charge of the domestic staff. Uncle Joshua engaged a nurse's care for Archie and a tutor to bring out the cleverness he detected in Michael. To those who knew nothing of their past association, it must have seemed unremarkably enough, though singularly generous on Joshua's Carnworth's part. Cordelia's duties as housekeeper were genuine and demanding, even if her rewards were lavish by the standards of the day. But some took a less charitable view. They suspected and whispered and implied that Joshua Carnworth's relationship with his housekeeper was not that of an employer with his employee. They were right in one sense, and in the other sense, I don't know, but I don't think so. Not while Archie Lanyon lived, at any rate, and he lived a long time. Michael Lanyon turned out to be a bright boy. At 12 he won a scholarship to Truro School. Uncle Joshua would presumably have paid his fees if he had to. He certainly supported him financially when he went up to Oxford in 1928 and during a post-Oxford year spent broadening his horizon on the continent. I assume he also eased his subsequent passage into a junior partnership at Colquhoun and Drew, the long-established Truro estate agent and auctioneer. There's really no room for doubt that Uncle Joshua did everything he could to help and encourage Michael. He came to look on him, I suppose, as the closest to a son he was ever likely to get, which only gave them rumour-mongers more to chew on, and my grandparents more to resent. The grocery business was doing better and better, but it didn't run to an expensive private education for my father. His university was the shop in River Street, his destined profession not auctioneering, but the world of bacon, bread and flour, of matches, mustard and soap, of 13 trading hours per day, 6 days per week. It must have gored him, as it gored Gran, to see Michael Lanyon swanking past in his office suit. My father had married my mother by then. Pam had been born. The large family had moved to the house in Crescent Road, where I was to arrive on the scene. They weren't doing badly, in fact. They'd have thought they were doing as well as anyone, but for the unavoidable comparison with the occupants of Trudell House. In April 1935, Michael Lanyon married Rose Pawley, the eldest daughter of Truro station master. My parents and grandparents were invited to the wedding. It was a gesture of reconciliation they weren't inclined to reject, however many resentments they were obliged to stifle. The future had to be considered as Uncle Joshua grew older. The doubts about who he meant to bequeath his wealth to assumed disturbing proportions. Gran knew when to put pragmatism before principle, and this was such a time, so that when I wished the happy couple well, the newlyweds had no need to seek a home of their own. Trudell House was large enough to accommodate as many children as they might be blessed with. It had become in many ways the Lanyon home, even though Cordelia remained technically a mere living housekeeper. Gran can have liked none of this, but she didn't deem it polite to say so. Instead, she did her best to ensure her brother didn't forget how much thicker blood was than water. For this part, Uncle Joshua remained warily amiable. The proportions of his wealth, and now he intended to dispose of it, remained a matter between him, his conscience, and Mr. Cloak, his solicitor, in which office, safe in Lemon Street, his will had long lain. Rose Lanyon's first pregnancy happened to coincide with my mother's second. In March 1936, either side of Hitler's reoccupation of the Rhineland, Nicky Lanyon and I entered his life, and with it this story. Monday morning brought the press to Trudeau House. It was scarcely a Soon siege, just one or two of Fleet Street's 2nd Division snoopers, hoping to note out the background to what was so far just a page 5 suicide with strings, too idle to read their own papers, 34 years old cutting. They were unaware of all the reverberations of the event, and naturally we left them that way. Trevor claimed the guest had found the body, which was almost true, but he didn't mention that the guest was his brother-in-law and that he was still on the premise. I left early for lunch with my parents and followed a rambling route down to the Helford estuary through the sun-warmed countryside. Landmartha was a low-pitched, mellow stone house on the heights above Helford Passage, with a glorious subtropical garden descending in leisurely terraces towards the river. Here my mother pursued her passion for camellias, hydrangeas, and Mediterranean exotics, while at the golf course they backed onto the property, my father pursued his passion of hitting a pimple white ball into a hole. Such occupations seemed superfluous to me, when you need only to glance out of the window to see the greenness of headlands and the blueness of skies mirrored in sparkling water. But I lived in landlocked Berkshire and knew the rarity of such scenes. To my parents, who seldom left Cornwall, it was simply what you looked at while eating your breakfast. They greeted me sympathetically, as if expecting me still to be distressed by my experience. I was, but not in the way they'd expected. The physical shock had been supplanted by creeping unease. With no amount of sympathy was going to dispel, we sat on the terrace above the top lawn with our aperitifs, pink gin for Dad and sherry for Mum, and homemade lemonade for me, while Mrs. Hannaford, the housekeeper, prepared lunch. The setting made the somberness of our discussion seem all the stranger. We should have been sharing our pleasure at how the wedding had gone, but Tabitha and Dominic were, for the moment, forgotten. They, after all, had the good fortune to be on the other side of the world. I'm sorry for anyone who's desperate enough to take their own life, said Mum, but what I don't understand is coming all this way to do it. One shouldn't speak ill of the dead, Dad chimed in, but damn it all, it seems almost spiteful. In what way? I inquired as I sipped my lemonade. Well, doing it at Trudeau House guarantees embarrassment for us, doesn't it? It means the press will remind everyone of the murder. Why should that embarrass us? It's something we should certainly do without. It's something we could certainly do without, said Mum. Saturday was so altogether lovely than this. Gather from him he spoke to you that afternoon, said Dad. Yes, he did. Make any sense? Not much, I paused. He asked me who killed his father. They both frowned at me in puzzlement for a moment. Then Dad said, Mad, you think? Confused, certainly, but I suppose you'll have to be to do such a thing. You know the tree he used, the horse chestnut. It's the one we used to swing from. I don't remember a swing, said Mum, but we visited Trudeau House so seldom in those days. I virtually lived there in the summers. Did you? You know I did. I know you and Nicky were quite friendly. Quite friendly? We were best pals. An exaggeration, surely, dear. No, not at all. If we hadn't been, why would I have spent a week with him at Nansworth all the summer before? Was it as long as that? We were due to go again that summer too. Really? I can't recall. You encouraged the friendship. Dad snorted. Why should we have done that? To keep in with Uncle Joshua, I suppose. A small but stubborn silence fell between them. Dad cleared his throat and swallowed some gin. Mum flicked a wasp away from the lemonade jug and rose hurriedly from her chair. I'd better see how Mrs. Hannaford's getting on. Excuse me. As soon as she was outside, Dad looked across at me and said, You were brooding on this before he killed himself, weren't you? I remember you were in an odd mood during our game of snooker. You should have told me what it was all about then. I didn't want to spoil your anniversary. Besides, if meeting him had been the end of it, I probably have been able to put it out of my mind. You should try to do just that now. There's no point agonizing over whether we thought it might be beneficial for you and him to get acquainted when you were both children. We're talking about 40 odd years ago, for God's sake. But did you think it might be beneficial? He pursed his lips. In a sense, your grandmother was worried Uncle Joshua would forget about his family in favour of the Lanyons, and with good reason, as it turns out. But remember, it was your future, yours and Pam's. We were trying to safeguard. I don't see that as something we need to apologise for. He threw me a challenging glare. Neither do I. It's just I can't help feeling responsible in the way for Nicky ending up as he did. That's ridiculous, is it? He was my friend, however long ago. And his father murdered your great uncle, however long ago. Have you forgotten that? No, but it's more complex than you think. I went to see Ethel Jago. According to her, when Rose Lanyon left Truro, she was Chris. It was my mother calling to me from the French window as I led to the drawing room. Phone call for you. Who is it? She says an old friend, though I'd never heard of him. Don Prideaux. Your mother's memory's not with it. Not what it was, Dad said softly. You were at school with a boy called Prideaux, weren't you? Yes, afterwards he was a journalist with the Western Morning News. Dad nodded. He still writes for them. Then he treated me with a mirthless smile. That's friendship for you. I let the remark go. Rose hurried into the drawing room. My mother had vanished, but she left the telephone on the sideboard of the hook. I picked it up and said, "Really, hello, Chris, you old bugger, it's Don Prideaux." His voice was lower and huskier than I recalled, but unmistakably his. Any chance of a few words about poor old Nicky Lanyon? What do you want to know, Don? Could we meet for a chat? I'm sure I'm in Truro. How about the City Inn at opening time this evening? The drinks are on me. Don, I'm really not sure I can make it. It's difficult. I have to do this piece, Chris. His tone altered. Some of the materiness drained away. You wouldn't want me to get anything wrong, would you? No, but I'll see you there. I sighed. All right, great. He chuckled throatily. Knew I could count on you. Strictly speaking, I'd known Don Prideaux longer than I had Nicky Lanyon. We met in the first year of Daniel Road School in the autumn of 1941, thrown together across the narrow aisle between our desks by alphabetical chance. He was large for his age, mischievously pugnacious and irrepressibly curious. The Second World War had been going on for 2 years by then, but since we were too young to remember much about life in peacetime, it had effectively been going on forever. I have no memory of the outbreak of hostilities in September 1939, although the scene at Crescent Road is so enshrined in family tradition that I feel as if I do. Would be to Perranporth for the day in the splendid old dark grey Talbot that was destined to spend the next 6 years laid up in the garage in sulky grandeur. We'd picnicked among the dunes and paddled on the beach. We'd pass a normal seaside Sunday. Then we'd driven back to Truro in time for the 6 o'clock news on the wireless and heard the dread announcement in perfectly modulated BBC English, which had so transfixed Gran that she had to notice half my eggs soldier dropped into her tea and had gone on drinking it without complaint. Many of the features of life I became aware of as a child were actually wartime exigencies I mistook for permanent states of affairs. Rationing meant Napier's grocery became less a private business than a branch office of the Ministry of Food, which registered customers, fixed prices, and a perpetual discussion of points, coupons, and legendary pre-war delights like pineapples and bananas, which I had difficulty even envisaging. Call-up meant half the adult males in the neighbourhood managed to distant parts, occasionally reappearing on 48-hour leave with bulging kit bags and severe haircuts. My father was one of them, departing in the spring of 1944, war spent administering army food supplies from behind a desk somewhere in Yorkshire. The blackout and restrictions on travel didn't mean much to me, although Pam frequently complained that we would never went to Perranporth anymore, whether she'd have wanted to scramble over barbed wire defences to reach the sea, supposing we'd had enough petrol to drive there in the first place, is another matter, of course. Cornwall was spared the worst of the Blitz, so nights huddled in an air raid shelter didn't figure in my childhood. Gran pointed out a glow on the eastern horizon to me one evening and told me it was Plymouth burning, but I had no conception of what that really meant. On spring and summer nights I heard the dull and random thumps of bombing raids on Falmouth docks, but nobody seemed to think they were likely to come any closer. They thought again in August 1942 when a bomb hit the Royal Cornwall Infirmary just outside of Capitol Hill from us. John Prideaux, whose family lived in Redenick Lane, that bit closer to the hospital, reckoned the blast had reverberated him out of his bed. But even then he had proto-journalistic gift for exaggeration. We walked down to look at the damage together next morning and thought it all great fun, unaware as we were that real people had been crushed to death beneath the rubble. The Lanyons were shadowy figures to me at this time in my mind. They were relatives of some kind, cousins perhaps, but there always seems to be an ambiguity about our connections with them. Gran took Pam and me to Trudeau House for tea with Uncle Joshua on several occasions, and the atmosphere was never one of a brother and sister at ease with each other. Uncle Joshua had been in Belgian family who'd fled the German invasion in 1940 and ended up on a cargo boat in Falmouth Harbour. Gran seemed to disapprove of them somehow, possibly because Uncle Joshua gave them such a free run of the place and didn't appear to distinguish between her children and the Lanyons, Nick and little Frida. Michael Lanyon was in the RAF, the prominent place in the drawing room Uncle Joshua had, according to a photograph of him in pilot officer's uniform, was another irritant to Gran, as I could tell by her serendipitous glares at it. But she kept up a stubbornly amicable front, the greatness of my unwitting expectations ever fixed in her mind, and at the end of my second year at Daniel Road, she played a trump card she'd been fondling for a long time. Pam was about to start at the county grammar school. No money had been spent on her education, and it had never been implied that any would be spent on mine. But Gran had been putting funds aside for some time, apparently. She wanted to enroll me at Truro School. The reasoning behind this was obscure to me. I had no wish to leave Daniel Road and the circle of friends that I could quite there, John Prideaux amongst them, but my wishes were hardly relevant. It'll be the making of him, Gran averred, and what's good enough for Cordelia Lanyon, grandson. Here we came nearer. The mark is good enough for mine. There was no doubt in my mind that Gran resented, even disliked Cordelia Lanyon. I couldn't understand why, given the old lady's gentle manner and quiet, white-haired beauty. She wore mostly black at this time, in Victorian style manner for her recently deceased husband, and was all dimple-cheeked kindness to me when we met. Gran described her as Uncle Joshua's housekeeper, but her daughter-in-law Rose, a chubbier, less elegant woman, though just as kindly, was the one who served tea whenever we visited Trudeau House. Cordelia seemed to occupy a more exalted position. Pam referred darkly to family secrets I was too young to entrust with, probably because she hadn't been entrusted with them either. But I was the one whom schooling was being disrupted on account of them, which made me all the more determined to find out what they were. In September 1943, I packed off in my stiff new blue and grey serge uniform to Truro's school prep department at Trislake, a converted manor house a mile out of city along the Redworth Road. That miles seemed more like 100. So remote did my friends at Daniel Road suddenly become. As it turned out, I was to be reunited with John Prideaux 5 years later, when he won a scholarship to the senior school and caught up with me there. But then the war would be over. So would the friendship I was about to form with Nicky Lanyon, and so would the lives of Joshua Cunnerworth and Michael Lanyon. It's just as well we can't foresee the future, otherwise the past wouldn't be such a carefree place. I hadn't seen Don in 20 years. We'd revived our schoolboy friendship and worked both of us to Plymouth in the late 50s. He was chafing at the tedium and triviality of provincial journalism then, just as I was chafing at the tedium and triviality of department store management. Would become drinking companions, swapping dreams of our glamorous cosmopolitan futures, his in Fleet Street, mine in the music business. However you looked at it, life hadn't played along. The Don I found groping up the bar of the City Inn that evening had lost a lot of hair and gained a lot of weight, but he was still a long way from Fleet Street, and when he heard that I wanted to drink, his horrified grimace suggested he didn't think I'd handle the intervening years with much more success than he had. Perrier water? He spluttered. You must be joking. I'm afraid not. I've been teetotal for more than 10 years now. In God's name, why? With all your money, you could be rinsing your teeth in vintage champagne. I sat on the bar stool next to his and smiled ruefully. Doctor's orders. That bad? The big city didn't turn out to be very good for me. Think yourself lucky you never made it to Fleet Street. They might have weaned you onto something harder on the system than beer. I'd have been willing to take the chance. Why didn't you? It never came. I got bored before I got famous. And now it's too late. Surely it's never too late. Easy for you to say that, sitting pretty on the kind of worth millions. You know as well as I do, Don, that I've had to stand on my own 2 feet since leaving Plymouth. Not a penny of those millions has come my way. But you've got them to look forward to, haven't you? I'm not sure, except that the contents of my father's will are definitely none of your business. Don raised his hands in a gesture of pacification, smoking curling up from the cigarettes gripping between his 2 most nicotine-stained fingers. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just that from where I'm standing, you haven't had things so bad. The singer you married, what was her name? Melody Farron. Divorced yet? Since you asked, yes, a long time ago. How did I guess? You must have done well out of that. Still get a cut from her royalties. There aren't any royalties to speak of, and even if there were, I wouldn't be entitled to a share. What does she do now? Keeps goats on a small holding in North Wales. What a waste. She had a good voice, and an even better body, as I recall. But then you know all about that, wouldn't you? Yes, Don, I would. But you're not going to. I certainly ought to have known, but my marriage to Melody Farron, real name, my Fanwin Probin, had been so blurred by my alcoholism that I'd had been hard put to dredge up any of the details, even supposing I wanted to. After what I put her through, she was probably wise to plump for celibate goat-keeping in Snowdonia. Which year did she come third in the Eurovision Song Contest? Don asked musingly. Must have been when miniskirts were at her shortest, because the one I saw her wearing on the telly for that fandango he gave up as an expression hardened. Well, all water under the bridge, eh? You're in the classic car game now, is that right? Who told you? Nobody. Saw one of your ads in magazines, Napier Classic Convertibles of Pangbourne. That's me. You must be interested in my Morris Minor bags of character, but not much performance. Bit like its owner. Why don't we come to the point? All right, Nicky Lanyon. He turned up at Trudeau House on Saturday and spoke to you. Hanged himself that night. You found him the following morning, correct? So far. His mother died recently. No other close family. So Nicky gets depressed and decides to end it all. But he comes all the way here to do it. That shows a nice sense of what irony. Hanged like his father on property you could say that his father was hanged for. No wonder the Rat Pack's down for London. It's a gift, isn't it? Or it would be if they could be bothered to check out all the angles, which is where you come in. Exactly, you and Nicky were buddies. Chris, seen him at all since 47, have you? Before Saturday? I mean, no, you've forgotten all about him, I expect. But he hadn't forgotten about you, apparently not. What did he say to you on Saturday? Nothing coherent. Oh, come on, it's true. Something about his father, wasn't it? Don's eyes engaged mine. I spoke to Ethel Jago this afternoon. I wrote a piece about her son's death a few years ago, and she mentioned her connection with the Lanyons then. She also happened to think my article was a restrained and tasteful piece of journalism. So this was more communicative with me than she might have been if some leather jacket oik talking in a Cockney accent had turned up. I'm several steps ahead of them. I know about you and Nicky, which they don't seem to, and I know he's been protesting his father's innocence for the past 34 years, which is what I suspect he was doing when you met him. Correct again? No. Then I must be losing my sense of smell, which I'm not. He couldn't accept his father was a murderer. That's not the same as believing he was innocent. I can pile on the pathos for this piece if I have to. Chris, I can portray Nicky as a sad and lonely victim of life, deserted by his best and oldest friend. What's stopping you? The possibility that there's a bigger story behind it all. Ethel told me about Michaela as well. He smiled faintly at my flinch of surprise. Michael Lanyon's posthumous child. Now, that could be a real scoop. Looks like it's yours for the writing. Not quite. I need more information. And as far as I can see, the only likely source is Nikki's stepfather, Neville Considine. Why are you wasting time with me then? Because Considine lives in Clacton and my editor isn't going to pay me to travel to Essex Coast to follow up a Cornish story. But he'll be down for the funeral, won't he? Bound to be. It's this Friday. You know more than I do, it seems. The point is, Chris, I need somebody to steer Constantine into my waiting arms, somebody to recommend me as the Boy Scout of my profession. There might be a few rivals sniffing around by then. I need somebody to push me to the head of the queue. You mean me? You're bound to meet him at the funeral. He must know you and Nicky were friends, so he won't quibble if you introduce me as another of his. You'll be there? Don shrugged. Ethel didn't seem to mind. Then why not get her to introduce you? Because you'll do it better. I told her the three of us were at school together, only you know that's technically not true. And that's the nearest you came to being a friend of Nicky, or shouting insults at him and me when we were walking down Chapel Hill in prep school uniform. Don gave another shrug, accompanied this time by a grin. It's a small enough distortion. It'll justify my presence at the funeral and help me win Constantine's confidence. Not much to ask in return for keeping your name out of the story. So this is it. Is it blackmail? Look at it this way. The publicity might throw up a clue to Michaela's whereabouts. There's no reason to assume she's dead. Is there? It could give some sort of purpose to Nicky's death if his sister could be reunited with what's left of her family. Why do I have the impression that isn't your primary concern? Because you're a mean-minded cynic who thinks all I'm after is a cracker of a story that I might be able to sell on to one of the nationals. You're a bit brave. You're the one who said it was never too late, so I did. You'll play along then? Alright, on the strict understanding that I won't read about myself in your paper. Great. John finishes being a signal to the barmaid for a refill. Another pair here. Chris, or are you driving? Thanks for listening.